So here's some good news. I finally got that horrible air cast off my foot. Yay! But then I got sick. Boo. When talking about video game franchises that have shaped me as a gamer, Halo is definitely at the top of the list of games to talk about. The reason why I even had an Xbox at all is because I played Silent Cartographer with my uncle so many times as a youngster. After playing it, I needed to have it for myself. I played through that first game numerous times, and when Halo 2 came out, that was my jam for quite a while, and there's no multiplayer game in existence that I've put more time into than Halo 3. What I'm trying to say is that when it comes to Halo as a series, I'm all in. I've got the games, I've got the spin-offs, I've got the books, and the only reason I have this garbage tablet that I never use is because I went to an event in Boston where they were letting people play Spartan Assault, and they also happened to be giving these away to those in attendance, and wouldn't you know it, I was more excited about the game. And when the franchise was given to 343, I was optimistic. A good amount of people involved in it were from Bungie. They handled the Combat Evolved Anniversary Edition admirably, and Halo 4 was their first original attempt, and I didn't really care for it. But when the hype train started rolling in for Halo 5, I put that in the back of my mind. It was part of a new trilogy, it was going to develop new characters, and after the events of Halo 4, a new story could have been really cool. I allowed myself to get excited and fell into the hype for Halo 5. I played through it when it came out, and then I completely forgot about it, which is never a good sign, but a couple of months ago I decided to play through it again to refresh my memory. And I gotta tell you, when those monks start chanting, I can't help but feel like everything's just gonna be okay. Or as they say in Japan, where this game barely sells, Daijobu. But everything's not gonna be Daijobu, is it? It's never Daijobu. But this title screen, it certainly makes you think like you're in for something great, that what awaits you once you press the start button, or the 3 lines button. You're in for an epic space adventure, but it never really comes. Or it does, and then you immediately forget about it. It's kind of like having really great sex, but then in the middle of the post-coital cigarette, you realize you don't smoke, and you're not even sure how you got the pack of cigarettes in the first place. Looking back, the only thing that I remember about Halo 5 are the things that ticked me off. If there's a word to describe the campaign, it would be uninspired, and that's really unfortunate because I really liked a lot of the additions that were made to the gameplay. I certainly noticed it switching back to Halo 3 after I played through Halo 5. The additions that were made in 5 make the game's moment-to-moment gunplay faster, and they give the player more options for tackling enemies. There was the ubiquitous sprint button, which may not sound like a huge deal, but Halo 3, or the games prior, never had anything like that. So I found myself, when I was playing through 3 again, pressing in the thumbstick to try and sprint, and getting a little upset when I realized that I couldn't. There's also in Halo 5 a charging attack and a ground pound, which adds some verticality to the firefights that weren't readily available in the older games. And that's why it's so sad that the level design is so bland and unmemorable in 5. I literally just beat this game again, and I can only tell you of 1 or 2 memorable segments. I liked the segment where you scaled down one of the Guardians. It was really cool, it was visually interesting, and I also liked the mission that took place on Helios. But that wasn't a byproduct of good level design, or good scripting, or interesting moments, but it was because Helios was a place in the Halo universe that fans hadn't gotten to see in much detail inside of a video game. #nerd. But my biggest problem with Halo 5 is that while the gameplay from an interactive standpoint is pretty decent, what you're accomplishing as a result is not. The game absolutely subscribes to the notion that if it's worth doing once, it's worth doing 5 times. Destroy 5 of this thing, scan 5 of that thing. Oh, did you enjoy that boss fight? Well, how about you do it 3 more times, but this time, to make it interesting, now there's 3 copies of the boss. And it's really sad that those fights against the Warden Eternal are what stick out the most to me in regards to Halo 5. He is awful. He's always annoying to fight, his attacks are basically one-shot kills, the squad AI can't do anything against him, so you always end up doing all of the heavy lifting yourself. The areas are usually large and open to compensate for this, but the final fight against 3 of him is in a closed quarters area, and it's the worst. Now, you could argue that this type of gameplay was in the previous games, and sure, you could, but there was always some narrative reason that you could make for it being there. For example, in Halo Combat Evolved, you have to destroy a bunch of generators to blow up the Pillar of Autumn. But that makes sense because, narratively, you know why you're destroying these generators. But in Halo 5, you have to destroy 5 cores to make it so Cortana doesn't win. The cores are never adequately explained. I couldn't tell you what they do, what they are, or why destroying them hinders Cortana at all. They just do. And that's another thing, and yeah, we're in spoiler territory, but if you haven't played the game by now, chances are you're not going to. Cortana's the big bad in this game. I know a lot of fans have had some issue with that, but I don't have a problem with it. Remember in the first game, Captain Keyes' first instruction to Master Chief is to not let Cortana fall into the wrong hands because of how catastrophic it could be. Or in Halo 3 when Sergeant Johnson says not to ever let her go. Yet she is left behind frequently, so at the end of the day, it's what you get, John, you big dumb tit. Speaking of big dumb tits, that could pretty much describe all the new characters. I remember saying after I saw Halo Nightfall, which was the show produced by Ridley Scott that came with the Master Chief Collection, that Spartan Locke was just going to be generic protagonist man, but hopefully Halo 5 would flesh him out more. No, that didn't really happen, nor did it for any other character. Everyone is just generic. This game billed itself as being a huge battle between Locke's squad and Chief's squad, but that's not really the case. It never really gets personal between the two of them. In fact, Locke goes out of his way to state exactly that. Essentially, it boils down to a boring robot hunting down another boring robot. Basically, every interesting thing that could have been done with this story was just not done. There's a popular parlance in wrestling that says that sometimes the best swerve is when there's no swerve at all, which means that sometimes when you're expecting a twist, the best twist is to not even have one. But when you set up the possibility for so many interesting ones, for none of them to happen is rather unfortunate. Now, in this disappointment with Halo 5 story, I started drinking, as I'm wont to do, and I ended up coming up with my own plot for Halo 5. They say as a writer, the best thing that you can do is keep writing, so here is my pitch for a different Halo 5 plot. It all starts with Master Chief doing routine missions in the far recesses of space with his squad, and he comes across different AIs that are in varying degrees of rampancy, and they're all rambling about Cortana being a savior to them, and following them to different locations guides him to Genesis, which is where Cortana is. She tells him her plan to take AIs to a position that the Forerunners were in at their peak, and she requests his help to get them there. His superiors, because Chief's, the consummate professional, he would tell his superiors, they tell him if he sides with Cortana, he will be considered AWOL. So, given their relationship over the years and the different things that they've been through together, he decides to side with her. And his squad, since they're in a position they are to him what he is to Cortana, they fully support him at first. But as time goes on and Cortana's requests get more and more destructive, the squad starts to fall apart. There starts to become ripples. Meanwhile, the UNSC, which is having some trouble with the remaining factions of the Covenant, hire Fire Team Osiris, a freelance group of Spartans that excel in capturing high-value targets. They're led by Spot and Locke. Locke looks up to Master Chief and is devastated by this seeming betrayal. He struggles with the fact that he has to chase down his hero, and his squad also worries about how they're going to be perceived for going after Master Chief because the rest of humanity views him as a hero. Now, the two squads narrowly miss each other throughout the course of the game, with Chief managing to one-up Locke due to his experience and firepower, courtesy of Cortana. Locke gets angered by this and he starts to treat it as a personal slight, and he's willing to take more drastic risks in order to capture the Chief and prove that he's overcome the person that he's looked up to for so long. But these risks put his squad in more and more unnecessary danger, and that group starts to rift as well. Cortana, meanwhile, she's eating all this shit up because the biggest threats to her are either currently destroying themselves from the inside, or the person whom she cares for the most firmly is within her grasp. So how's that for a setup? Fuck you. Pay me. But the real takeaway from all this is that Halo means a lot to me. I want to see it succeed, or else I wouldn't have come up with any of that. I mean, what kind of person would come up with any of that nonsense if they didn't care for the franchise? Now, I understand it's never really been award-winning material in terms of its story, but there was always a charming simplicity to the early games with their kind of lack of story. But now that they're adding all this melodrama and all these characters, they need to be developed. Not everything can be a faceless robot with a cool voice. But here's hoping that Halo 6 rights that ship. I mean, third time's the charm, right?